Hello everyone, welcome to the Frontline Club. Thank you for coming. Just before I hand over to Kevin Marsh, if I can ask you to switch your phones to silent, and when it comes to questions, if you can wait for the microphone because we're broadcasting live. And if you're on Twitter this evening, we're on hashtag FCOccupy. Over to Kevin.
Is the difference between them that this one works? Terrific. Okay, ready to go? Is there any technology that needs to be in place? Okay, so we can start. Well, welcome from me to this first Wednesday session. I'm Kevin Marsh. I used to work for the BBC, but I'm sure you won't hold that against me. The title of this evening's session is quite blunt. Occupy, what do they want? I'm not sure we'll get to a single answer on that. I've had a few discussions with some of the panelists so far, and I think the idea of getting to a single answer might be quite interesting. But as you know, these first Wednesday sessions, they're as much about you guys as about the panel up here. Now, we've got a fantastic panel this evening, quite a large panel, really, in Frontline Club terms. But you're also the important guys as well. So I'll be involving you with your questions and with any points you want to make as we go along. So if you have the urgent need to intervene, argue, discuss, debate, take issue with, then put your hand up and we'll try to get a mic to you as we go along. I'm going to allow the panelists here to introduce themselves in a moment, but just before we do that, I want to put the brutal question that is the title of this evening to you all, and just get a show of hands. Do you think you know what the Occupy movement wants? Could you put your hand up if you think you know what they want? I hate using they, because of course a lot of people inside here are us, but anyway, there you go. And how many don't think you know? Excellent. And irrespective of, and this is a very British question, of course, because this is how British politics works, irrespective of whether you think you know or not, how many of you support what Occupy is doing? Now, you see, this is very interesting.
I agree.
This is very interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see if any of that changes. Hopefully, but more of you who either support or don't support will know why you don't support or do support as the evening goes on. Let's kick off with a few first statements from the panelists, and I want to just start with where we are, really. Most people, I think, who are sitting here this evening have been down to St. Paul's. They have their own view of what's going on down there and what they've seen. But I'm going to start with Harry.
Okay.
I don't know if you've been down to St. Paul's.
I have. I
Okay.
was down there. I went down there yesterday. Had a good look around.
Great. So let's just share your first thoughts with Occupy.
I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Harry Cole. I'm a political blogger. I'm the news editor of the Guido Fawkes blog, and I'm what you might call an Occupy skeptic. I'm not entirely sure how this has happened. One thing that is clear that these people want is headlines, and they've certainly got that. They've definitely manipulated the media and grabbed the attention. However, it seems to have got out of their hands now, because instead of the media debating what it is that they want, what they're calling for, the story is about them and their battles, and it's become more of a process story in how people are kind of dealing with this rather than the overall goal, which in my view is in a way a little bit of a failure. And speaking to people down there and just generally watching things for the last couple of weeks, it's just I think their main problem is this overwhelming kind of mismatch of ideals going on. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you kind of organise a movement that's calling for what is essentially a redefining of capitalism, having speeches about climate change and Kurds and a whole variety of things like that in the space of 10 minutes at one point yesterday evening, I just think it's not working. It's fantastic attention seeking, but if you genuinely want to change things, and if you genuinely believe that you are representing the 99% of the country who don't have a voice, then stand. Get involved in the system of democracy that we already have. Because if you have 99% of people on your side, you're going to win a landslide and you're going to be in power, and you can make these changes instead of just these vague, vacuous statements about what you want. I think the main problem being is that we know what they don't want. They don't like capitalism, they don't like greed, they don't like corporatism, they don't like corruption. Yeah, no one likes those things. But the problem they need to get over and what they need to resolve is the fact that they need to They need to give us a solution.
No, he's not a
What is
You
the
just admit
solution?
that no one likes capitalism.
Sorry?
Did you just admit?
No. Like, corporate greed is what I was going with there. No, capitalism. Yeah, of course they like capitalism. Look at them; they're on their Macs. I know it's a ridiculous argument to say, oh, you can't go to Starbucks. You can't go to Starbucks.
What
Yeah.
Mac have to do with capitalism?
Sorry?
What Mac have to do with capitalism?
They are representing. Apple is one of the biggest and most successful global brands. They've manipulated globalization for their own advantages. Without
That's
capitalism.
a company producing technology, not.
Let's have the thought. Get the mic. Just tell us who you are, and then carry on with your point.
Alex Nikolov. I'm myself.
That's absolutely fine.
Yes, I mean capitalism, socialism, and communism are coming from the Cold War, and those are slogans like democracy.
Yeah.
This is not an aspirin, and you not take these things for kind of every other occasion. That's why blaming someone for saying that they loved capitalism in the form we're having today, for the fact that they're using Macs is absolutely like same story like the someone who's saying that the African uprisal was won because of Facebook.
Okay, let's.
This is like popular belief.
Fair enough. But then, when you've got a huge sign, which I saw on a photograph on Twitter, ironically, another huge corporation, you've got a sign that says "Capitalism isn't working," which is a sort of slogan they're rallying behind. It seems to be doing pretty well to me.
Naime, let's bring you in here because we started with a skeptic to give us a kind of little bit of an edge, bit of a clue.
I hope I succeeded.
Rather like Harry, can you just tell everybody here who you are, and then your thoughts on really some of what Harry's had to say, but also your thoughts on the Occupy movement, where we got to.
Sure, yeah. I'm Naomi Colvin. I have been working with Occupy London for a while. I also founded the British support campaign for accused WikiLeaks whistleblower Bradley Manning. And I could tell you a little bit about what I think Occupy has come from, and what I think it represents. Occupy London is one manifestation of a global emancipatory movement, which you can draw right back to Egypt and Tunisia at the beginning of the year. And the way this movement manifests in different countries, of course, there are national concerns which come to play. But there is something which unites all of these movements, which you can see from, in Europe, in the States, elsewhere. There is a concern about the activities of the financial services industry, that they're out of control. And there is a concern about the financial services industry and their relationship with government. So I think essentially you can put it down into two points. The mess we've got into since 2008 is symptomatic of an industry which has become unbalanced, and there are no effective restraints in place, and the incentive structures are wrong. And I think Occupy works on two different levels. There's sort of the anti-banker sentiment, which is at heart is about placing moral restraints on what bankers do. There should be a sense of social responsibility for people who work in finance. What are you giving back to the country you live in? Why, are you paying your taxes? Are you putting something back? So that's one set of restraints which aren't there at the moment, and that's not working. The other set of restraints which aren't working are the restraints placed by government. And I think Occupy is united by a sense that government is not operating properly in the interests of the general population. That finance is not being effectively regulated. And it's not being effectively regulated because the processes of accountability and participation in politics that we all hold dear, and all of those things that people talk about are great, but it's just not working properly. And at heart, Occupy is about getting people to participate again, to recognise the power that they wield, and to make that difference by getting involved, because the structures are there and they can work if only people would use them.
Got a point at the back there.
I'm just going to say...
Can you say who you are?
I'm Kate Reeford. I work for a youth website. I was going to say about when you say the bankers are not giving anything back, but they are paying taxes as well. So they are paying money back.
I mean, it is true that the financial services industry paid, I think, £52 billion in tax last year.
I'm sure.
Which pays for half of the NHS.
Well, I'm sure they did, but if they paid, if we could get, get rid of sort of the offshore, which is so prevalent, and the competition between countries to see, okay, well, come and house yourselves with us, and we'll we'll get you out of this amount of tax. Countries are competing on the basis of, who can enable big multinational companies to get out of paying tax, and that's morally wrong, I think.
Can I bring Aaron in now? Because Aaron, you've been down to the protest, and you've been down there to kind of study it. Could you tell the good people who you are and what you've been up to and some of the conclusions you've come to?
So initially I was involved quite heavily in the British student movement last year, as Harry might know. Primarily with youth occupation. I'm doing a PhD in net-mediated social movements post-1994, post EZLN and the Zapatista movement. So I'm really fascinated about this relationship between online organising and offline kind of collective action social movements. And so, like you said, I'm on side. I'm one of the 99%, but I'm more, in this particular instance, participant observer. I'm taking lots of interviews, talking to people, those who are critical, those who are on side, pessimists, optimists, and just trying to basically ascertain the people involved, the dynamics at work, etc. And so your question to me was basically my thoughts on previous to...
Well, no, I mean your thoughts on having been there as both, as you describe yourself, on side and an observer.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll go to a point Naomi said. She said it started this year with the Arab Spring. I mean, I would locate it far further back. I mean, we've got a number of dynamics at work here with certain dates in mind. So obviously the primary one is the fall of Lehman. None of this is possible post-2008 without the fall of Lehman. And this thing about what do they want? The role of social movements isn't propositional politics. It's not to advance manifestos or, they're not lobby groups or think tanks. What social movements explicitly seek to do is turn issues of social traction into problems that have to be addressed by institutional actors. And if they're not, then they become reformist movements or revolutionary movements. That's what they've always done. So if you look at, for instance, the birth of British socialism, starts in 1815, post-Napoleonic War. You've got a lot of demob soldiers, huge labour market, surplus labour, not many jobs available. It takes a long time before that becomes a propositional movement, the rise of Chartism, etc., the movement for universal suffrage, etc. Right now we're probably in Peterloo, 1819. The problem with the mainstream media is, of course, they want us to go from an 1815 moment to a Fourth Reform Act, 1919. Now that's not going to happen. It's going to take a very long time to formulate solutions. And when we say another world is possible, like Harry says, I mean, even the people who say that, myself included, don't really know what that looks like. And then the role of things like Occupy LSX is to reimagine the world, is to come up with solutions with regards to housing and healthcare, as much as the kind of finer philosophical nuances of Marxist theory, which is actually all the left has done for the last 50 years. So yeah.
Okay. Introduce yourself to these good people, and when we were talking beforehand, you were sort of thinking this was possibly a conservative movement, I think was the phrase you used.
Yeah, I think deeply conservative was the word I used with a small c. I'll introduce myself. My name's Daniel Ben-Ami. I'm a journalist and author. Excuse me. My most recent book was called Ferraris for All, which probably gives some idea of where I'm coming from. I believe that I hold to the traditional left-wing view, in fact, that human beings benefit from prosperity, that we should make societies prosperous as possible and have as much economic growth as possible. That used to be considered a left-wing view. Now it's become much less popular, unfortunately. I think it's really telling. I think that the title of this session is really astute. What does Occupy stand for? What do they want? Because it's completely extraordinary that it's the middle of September that the first Occupy event happened in Wall Street. Over 2 weeks since it happened in St Paul's, outside St Paul's, and yet it's still not clear what they want. And in fact, not only is it a kind of confused, deliberately leaderless movement, it makes a virtue of those things. It makes a virtue of not really having a clear outlook and perspective on what it's trying to do in the world. And that creates problems. It means that people can read into it what they want to read into it. They can say, it stands for this, it stands for that, depending on their own predilections. So it's a problem in that respect. I'd also draw to your attention the fact that the establishment loves this movement. Who has explicitly supported the movement in terms of saying that they sympathise with the cause? Barack Obama has said it. Mitt Romney, one of the leading American Republican candidates, has said it. Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, has said it. Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, has said it. British politicians have said it. Even the Financial Times has said that they support this movement, or at least that they kind of sympathise with the broad aims of the movement. So if you think it's a radical movement, I would challenge you to explain why it is that all these very powerful establishment figures love the movement, which is something that is very different from Tahrir Square. Because you compare it to Tahrir Square, people who went to demonstrate in Tahrir Square risked being run down by police armoured cars. Many of them were killed demonstrating. Very, very different from what's happening in America or Britain. Just to say one more thing about the banks. I'm not a particular fan of the banks, but the kind of one-sided, crude, blaming the banks for the crisis is just a completely narrow way of looking at the world. It's a view which is shared by the establishment. You know, Vince Cable, very happy to bash the banks. Barack Obama, very happy to bash the banks. David Cameron, very happy to bash the banks. But rather than bash the banks in a very crass kind of way, or pursue conspiratorial theories about how the banks rule the world, I would argue what we should be doing is looking structurally at what is wrong with the economy. The banks are part of that, but only a small part. Look at state policy, look at the non-banking sector, and really try to get a much more sophisticated, nuanced view of what is wrong with the economy. There are lots of other problems with the movement in my view, but I won't go into them now. I'll stop there for the time being.
Yeah, well, Richard Murphy, you don't agree with all of that, do you? We were talking beforehand. Introduce yourself and tell us why you don't necessarily see eye to eye with Daniel.
I'm Richard Murphy. I've come here dressed as an East Anglian chartered accountant on a day out in London, because that's what I am. But I'm also a political economist, and I'm a founder of the Tax Justice Network, and I write the Tax Research UK blog. And I've got a book coming out called The Courageous State next week. Do I agree with the message we've got from the right or from the left? No, because this whole message from Occupy is actually, you guys have really, really got it wrong. You're looking for very nice, simple solutions in a world that's fundamentally messy. You know, nice, simple, we profit maximize. We are, utility maximizers, whatever that means, because nobody's ever defined it. And we have very simple, nice structures of life which fit into nice hierarchies. That's Harry's world. And here we have materialism run wild on the left, and it'll all work out in the end. But none of us do those things. And after 30 years of neoliberalism, which has actually suited both left and right in many ways absolutely perfectly, which is why we have one strain of economic thought available for us to choose from right now within the political economy, which dominates all economic thinking, we end up with a social movement which is actually saying, hang on a minute, what this is about is creating a geography of dissent. A space where people can actually say, we are looking for alternative ideas because our right to dissent, our right to even think, has been crushed. You cannot be an economist in a UK university now and basically do anything other than be a neoliberal, subscribe to the mathematical view of modelling which they deliver, and come out with the answers which Harry thinks are the real world and which exist only on a blackboard. Now, bluntly, that's what this is about. Yes, it's messy, but so is reality. And yes, it doesn't quite know what it wants, but sit outside any changing room on a high street on a Saturday morning, as I do occasionally, and I'll tell you, I see people who can't make up their minds and go back in and out, in and out. And that's what we're like. Well, actually, these people are demanding the space to say, we want the chance to make up our minds about the sort of world we want to live in. What we do know is it's grossly unfair. We are being denied access to the resources that allow us choice. That's the 99 to 1. 1 have a choice, 99 don't. They've clearly got that message out there, and they've clearly delivered the message to the establishment, including the Church of England. You have to choose. It was an accidental target, it was a great target, it worked really well, and I'm delighted it caused chaos for them. Absolutely delighted that it did, and I speak as somebody who is a Christian, actually now more a Quaker than anything else, hence the white poppy. But it's really about drawing attention to this alternative narrative, and that is where we're going. We're not going to live in Harry's world, we're not going to live in your world. Materialism, in a finite world, dead model, literally. Going to kill us if we don't change it. That's why people aren't accepting it. So time to move on. And that's why this is so significant, because this is the beginning of the paradigm shift.
Keep thinking about your questions, because I'm going to...
Thank you.
Keep thinking about your questions. I'm going to bring you all back in a moment. But Julian, we didn't get a chance to speak just before, so I have no idea what your views are on this.
My name is Julian Assange. I'm the editor of WikiLeaks. I've had a bit of a busy day.
Yeah, that's probably why we couldn't speak about it.
I'll try to be coherent as possible, but no more. So I was just thinking when when Harry was was speaking, and I think it's a bit unfair that one person on the panel was picked on and no one else, but maybe that will change throughout the evening.
Yeah. Possibly not.
Hold my breath.
That when you say that if 99% of people believe something, it happens, well, who here doesn't like spam in your email box? I suggest it is vastly more than 99% of the community who doesn't want spam, and yet spam continues every hour, indeed every minute. So this is something that I have thought about over the years, and it is when there is a blight on the general community, but the ability to pull resources together to tackle that problem is impinged by the nature of the problem. And so spam is one of those things that we are all affected individually. We are all taxed, all our time is wasted, billions and billions of dollars per year if you add it all up. But you can't add it all up. You can't actually take all that individual suffering that we all have from receiving spam and put it together and create an organization, or put it together and create a movement. And that has been an historic problem for other issues as well. But right now, we are somehow, which is what we will discuss tonight, somehow we are managing to harness all that discontent. We were not able to harness all that discontent previously. And so it seems to me that there is now a mechanism for harnessing that discontent. And what is that mechanism? So that mechanism, broadly speaking, is our increased ability to communicate with each other efficiently and organize efficiently, compared to those organizations such as Goldman Sachs and the State Department, which have for many years had extremely efficient internal communication structures. So this is about creating an external communication structure where our discontents and our hopes and dreams can all be pulled together to unite in common action. Now, you might think that the actions that have taken so far are not very common and not very united, but they are so common and so united that they are happening now where they did not happen before. And that should bring us to the role of the mainstream press. Why wasn't this happening 5 years ago? Because we speak about, we exchange information, we see each other's views, we try to come together in our causes and beliefs. Well, shouldn't that be happening anyway? Shouldn't that have happened 5 years ago? Shouldn't the mainstream press have been the mediator of people's true beliefs about what was wrong with the world and what was right with the world and who was to blame and who deserved support? Shouldn't they? Well, they weren't, and that's why this movement didn't happen 5 years ago and why it is happening today, because we have ways now to communicate information about the state of our world to each other that bypasses the very institutions that were censoring it for the last 50 years.
Yeah. More?
More?
No, I'm not suggesting more. I'm just asking if there is more.
Yeah, so in my work in Kenya, so WikiLeaks started out as an organization that we wanted to tackle the most closed societies on Earth. And so yes, we thought that included the former Soviet, included China, and included corrupt African dictatorships. But what I found working in Kenya is that when money was looted from the Kenyan treasury, billions of dollars looted from the Kenyan treasury, it flowed out of Kenya and it flowed into London. And it flowed into New York properties, and it flowed into 10,000 hectare ranches in Australia. And the reality is that there's not a single significant piece of developing world corruption that does not end up in the Western world. Absolutely. And so we have a global problem Corruption is a global problem. When money is taken out of the developing world, such as the circumstance in Kenya, it is worse than local corruption. If you steal money locally and you spend it locally, at least you're not debasing the currency. When billions of dollars is taken from the developing world and stuffed into London banks, you have to sell, in Kenya's case, Kenyan shillings, and you have to buy pounds, which debases the shilling and every economic purchase that happens in that country and raises the pound. And you might say, well, that's great for England. That's what England has always done and it's worked so far. But I'm telling you what happens when London banks become part of that corrupt cycle of ripping off money from the developing world. They themselves become corrupted. And now we have situations in Western world banks that corruption that was developed to fleece the developing world is now being turned in on us as a result.
Okay, let's pause it. Pause it there for a moment. We'll come back to this. Feel free to burst into spontaneous applause. is there any? Okay, yeah, coming. Tell us who you are and ask your question or make your point.
My name is Sandy, and I've been blogging on the Radio 4 Today Facebook page, and I'm in admiration of Greece, what Greece are doing, and arguing this very
Sorry,
point.
which aspect of what Greece are doing? Because it's very difficult to say exactly what it is.
Just what you said. Standing up to all the pressure and saying, no, we're not doing it. And I think that's what's going to come off the referendum.
Sure.
And I just wanted to make the point that... Sorry.
But do you see a connection between the strikers, between those saying no in Greece, and the Occupy movement?
That it's our turn next. They ripped off Africa. They screwed Africa during the 20th century, in the way Julian just said. And now it's our turn. They're screwing us. Because all the deal is they want to buy up everything, don't they? They want to buy up all the utilities, the public transport, and charge us what they like. And that's the deal with writing off the debt, I believe.
So who's they that you're talking about?
The 1%.
Is that on a global scale, or because if you're talking about a global 1%, surely anyone earning over £25,000 in this country is in the global 1%
transnational capitalist class.
So much money. You shouldn't have that much money.
You don't think I have the right to earn £25,000? Come on, you can't. If you're gonna accuse people of buying up, you've got to look at what the Chinese are doing in America. Look what the Chinese are going to do in Europe.
25,000 is not 1%. Oh, come on.
It is. If you look, when you've got millions and millions of people living on $1 a day, less than $1 a day, it does put you in.
That's nitpicking for no benefit.
Let me just ask Naomi a question, because you were quite...
Is the 1% of the world, or is it the 1% of the West? Or is it, what's the distinction?
It's a metaphor, Harry. I know you don't understand them, but that's what it is.
From the man who just said that they're crushing the way we think. Some of us are still trying. I'm not just going to jump onto your uniformed.
I just want to come back quickly to Naomi, just to pursue one point, because you were very, very helpfully clear about the relationship between Occupy and the financial services industry. But it's quite clear, A, from what I've seen you writing about, but also the discussion here tonight, that it's clearly much bigger than that.
Yep.
And it's also, and I think we're hearing this from Richard, it's about the processes. It's about, and Aaron really, that it is about a kind of process of thinking. Now, do you think people get this idea? I mean, outside the Occupy movement itself?
It's one of those things which is quite hard to communicate, because it's a participatory movement, and the best way of understanding it is to join in. That's sort of the problem we have with communicating that through the press. And there are journalists who have come and stayed with us and written great stuff about what it's actually like to join in and how the General Assembly works and how we reach decisions. But basically, Occupy, we're not. People criticise us for not putting forward a set of demands which they can rebut, and then they'll feel comfortable with doing that. That's an easy thing for them to do. But we're not, putting together a proposal for the society we want to see. We're setting an example by actually building the society we want to see.
And do you think that can break out from, without being unkind about it, a fairly narrow group of people in one location? I'm going to take Richard's point about geography. But
yeah, well, the way this movement has spread so far, and it has spread, with incredible rapidity throughout the world, is that people see what is going on in one place, and maybe one person sees that and then comes back to where they're living and think, oh, I've got to start this here. It grows by contagion, and I think it will continue to grow.
We've got a contribution here, and then we'll go down here.
I'd like to slightly rephrase the question, what do they want, to what will success look like? 1 year out, 2 years out, 5, 10, 20. In terms of concrete, I mean, these generalities, we hate the 1%, it's a load of crapola, I don't want to waste time on it. What are, if you think about the progress you're trying to achieve, you've talked about a new geography of debate, you've talked about the global linkages here, that all makes sense, it's actually really insightful, but what would the steps look like that 2 years from now you'd say we're on the right track, we're moving the way we want to move?
Name me first on that, and then I'd like to bring most of the rest of you in.
Well, we're clearly already on the right track.
But longer term, what will it look like years out?
Okay, but the fact that we have redefined the scope of debate in British politics is not something to be sniffed at. You know, we have turned major national institutions over to our point of view, essentially, by pinpointing inconsistencies and contradictions in their position, which you can do now. And it's, you know, anyone with a Twitter account can do this kind of thing now. That amazing levelling is very much a part of what Occupy is about, you know, that regaining of individual power. I mean, I know this from experience, you know, even the most, you know, impressive and autonomous of institutions, you know, are vulnerable to their messages being picked apart and examined by people, you know, with a bit of intellect and a Twitter account. It's easy.
Daniel, and then Aaron.
I think that's breathtaking narcissism. To think that a few hundred people outside the steps of St Paul's have changed the terms of political debate in Britain and internationally is utterly absurd. And in fact, it's the exact opposite. These people on the steps of St Paul's are reflecting the view of the elite, which is ironic given the way they talk about 99% and 1%. So, for example, do you know where this 1% and 99% comes from? The idea comes from Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, former advisor to President Bill Clinton, economic advisor. He was the one who came up with this in the first place. Another thing which is wrong.
Antonio Gramsci.
Another thing which is wrong with this idea, this form of egalitarianism, it may seem to be radical, but it's not at all. Because if you say that you believe in global equality, and at the same time you say we've got scarce resources, we've got one planet, we're running out of resources, what the demand for equality means is that we should all make sacrifices. That's what Barack Obama has said. He believes in shared sacrifice. That's what all of these billionaires, who, like Warren Buffett in America, who've gone around saying, I'll accept to pay higher tax cuts. What they really want is for everyone to make sacrifices. So essentially, if this movement is saying anything coherent at all, it's really saying, we're making sacrifices, most of us are making sacrifices, so rich people should make sacrifices at all. I would rather be against this form of egalitarianism and against sacrifice. Let's move forward rather than moving back.
Is your point on this question?
Well, I guess it's basically for Naomi. My name's Patrick Hayes from Spikes magazine. I mean, you say you've won the institutions over to your point of view, but it's still not clear to me what that point of view is. And this kind of participatory kind of rhetoric, I think, is actually, in some ways, quite worrying, quite insidious, because it means that you're not actually having a debate with people. It means you effectively just become a blank page through which people can just project their anxieties. And I think that's right. It is extremely narcissistic, as Daniel Ben-Ami points out, to really claim that you're representing 99% of the
You made a point. Is yours a response to that?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like
Tell
to
us who you are.
particularly... Sorry?
Tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Susie.
That's
I'm
fine.
from the Occupy movement. You know, I'm also a member of the SWP, but I'm plugging a different newspaper today, which just came out today.
Can't stop yourself selling newspapers.
Exactly. It's free. However, you don't have to give. If you want socialist worker from me, you'll have to give me a pound. But if you want this is free.
Okay.
But I want to.
Make your point,
My point is, I want to argue against the point of it's only a few hundred people in front of St. Paul's. No, on November 30th, there are 3 million British workers who are going on strike. At least 3 million. Okay, that's only the 3 million who've agreed to date. You know,
unless the latest offer.
We have more time. Well, let's not be pessimistic. You know, Furthermore, you know, the anger is not just in Britain; it's in Greece, Ireland, etc., etc. Just one other point about the participatory thing. It's not a problem that this movement doesn't have all the answers yet. Democracy means we discuss the problems, we work it out. Each day brings a new problem. You know, I'm working at the kitchen down at St. Paul's. Every day there's some new problem. We're sorting it out. You know, every day at 10 o'clock we have a problem that we have to deal with, and we discuss it, we vote on it, and we sort it out democratically. And this is how we're going to build the new world.
Naomi, just answer the the point about, I think, was it narcissism was the point? Was the word?
You know,
I mean, I may be narcissistic, but
I can't remember who used the word
Okay,
narcissism.
well, my basic question is, how do you think you can... You said you've won a lot of major institutions over to your point of view, but you also celebrate the fact that you don't have a point of view, you don't have coherent...
Quick one on that, then I want to bring Aaron
I mean,
in.
what I'm talking about is we've extended the terms of debate in British politics. You know, the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury is now talking about reform of finance, which was not happening before.
Rowan Williams has been talking about that for years, though. He's been a member of the Jubilee group, which was a left-wing group of Quakers. This is not new to Rowan Williams. I was more shocked that he'd been quiet for 2 weeks rather than the fact he's opened his mouth now.
I mean, he achieved something. He achieved something based on the fact that those people were there.
Aaron, can I bring you in on
I mean, one of the key points for me is actually how puerile media analysis and comment has been about the entire phenomenon globally. So just a few points. So with regards to Harry, who was saying, who are the 1%? Now, in Gramscian political economy, there's something called the transnational capitalist class. So with the end of the ontological primacy of the nation state, because we now have transnational capital, we now have transnational labour markets, we have transnational commodity chains, it's perfectly sensible we have a transnational capitalist class. That's how it works. So I have friends who are political risk analysts in the city. You know, when the crap hits the fan, they're going to go to Qatar, Malaysia, or Singapore. That's natural because they're members of the transnational capitalist class. People likewise that go to Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore are going to come here right now. You know, a second point with regards to why wasn't this happening 5 years ago? The variables are absolutely unprecedented. They're unbelievable. You've got the biggest transformation in global political economy since 1492. You're looking at the industrialization of India and China, which for 17 of the last 20 centuries were the world's two largest economies. That's historically where the action's been at globally. Europe ran a trade deficit with Han China, even during the Roman Empire. You know, that's why the Brits have the Opium War, because they're so rigorously orthodox in terms of Adam Smith and sort of liberal economics and liberal political economy. They're so desperate to not run a trade deficit, they had to force opium onto the Chinese. Right? So that's one huge thing. End of Europe, probably, I mean, the third worldification of Europe and the US, if you like. Right? A second one is the end of a huge cycle of prosperity we've had since 1945. They're known in political economy as Kondratiev cycles. Maybe Richard is somebody who's better trained in these things than I, or maybe not, I don't know. Maybe he 65-year boom, and we're coming to the end of it. And that's going to take a really long time to work itself out. It's going to take 15, 20 years. This is not the early 90s. This is not the late 70s. Well, actually, that was a huge crisis in itself. But this is something that's the end of a cyclical thing that starts in 45. Final thing, now with regards to the role of the internet. I wrote something with a chap here called Guy Aitchison about what we called open source activism, incredibly banal language, but we try and make it accessible. It's no coincidence that you have an incredibly vital student occupations movement in California in 2009, which actually catalysed a lot of the stuff happening now. Likewise, Greece, 2008. You had 700 Greek schools in occupation several weeks ago, 90 universities, 56 British universities last year. This is not new. And the whole thing of collective action and social movements is so profoundly changed with the introduction of the internet that it's something we won't work out for several decades. The last time we had a technology this disruptive in terms of how we engage with collective action was the printing press. And we know what happened then: Reformation, nation state, deliberative sphere, mass literacy, also something called a 30 Years' War. But you know, the great, before I finish this brief point, the great anecdote I love with regards to the printing press is that 30 years after Gutenberg, you start to get pornographic novels, and it takes 100 years before you get scientific journals. So you know, it took 5 to 10 years, sort of after the mass kind of engagement with the internet, to get lolcats, and actually now we're starting to do something good with it. But yeah, I think it's.
Is your point on, is it on this point?
Well, yeah, it is in fact something that Naomi said earlier on. Sorry, my name is Christian May, and it's a question for Naomi, but you might want to broaden it out. I haven't seen.
This end quite quickly.
Okay, I haven't seen anybody at St Paul set themselves on fire yet in protest at the state suppression, and I think protesters in North Africa and the Middle East would find your comments about how you're part of that same movement deeply offensive. And I think you are so free you don't even know it, and I wonder whether you would apologise to those protesters.
I don't want to bring.
Can I just make a really quick point of clarification? This is really not known. Actually, self-immolation was quite common in 1990 with the poll tax movement against Thatcher. Happened several times. There are actually historical accounts of this, which I've read, which you won't hear about. So that thing about it's in Egypt, it's in Tunisia, no, it happened under Thatcher. And I can actually promise you, the rate this Conservative government's going at, it's going to happen in 47 here as well.
Last night there
This
was
place
a
the north.
suicide attempt in front of St. Paul's.
Yes.
I'm assuming no one's advocating suicide, so maybe we shouldn't debate it.
I don't want to get distracted.
the point about the courage shown by those in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, and the courage of Bradley Manning, if he has done what he's accused of done, is those are examples of courage and integrity, of people going out and putting themselves at great risk to assert their rights, to take part in the political process and have a say in how they're ruled. And that example makes me, and has made me feel that I need to go out and do something for myself. Seeing that kind of courage, I think, gives a sense of responsibility to actually go out and continue that work in whatever situation you're in.
Look, non-voting, participatory discussion organisations exist. I mentioned I'm a Quaker. We haven't had a vote since 1652, and it's still going strong. It's also had an enormous impact on the world. It's the only church to have won the Nobel Peace Prize because of taking a principled stand. And so don't believe that because you actually take some time and have a little bit of confusion on the way and don't vote, you can't actually come up with some extremely strong principles to which people will adhere and which will have an enormous impact on the world, including, incidentally, of course, upon the development of British capitalism. Barclays was a Quaker bank. Cadbury's was a Quaker company. They've been corrupted. But the impact on British capitalism was quite enormous and was a very different model from that which we've got now. The point about this, and I'm going to go back to this question, is what it's going to look like, because I think that's an incredibly good question. And I don't think we are going to see that we are going to find that there is a universal system where people sit around and do this to decide whether we are or not going to do things. That will work for certain groups, a small number of people. The fact is that what is happening outside St Paul's is indicative of a discontent which exists certainly outside my son's school gate. They aren't going to St Paul's, but they sure as heck are, 1, frightened, 2, worried, and 3, want change, because the world around that school is not a happy place right now, and this is clear indication of what's going on. What is this movement going to do? It's going to liberate people to think differently. It's going to, I hope, liberate the Labour Party to think differently. It certainly is going to liberate the Greens, who didn't need much liberation to think differently, because they already are. But the point is that that is going to morph the political debate. We're not going to see at the next general election, I hope, parties which offer basically 2 policies which were so similar that the choice between them was so damn hard we ended up with a coalition government that nobody wanted. We're going to have some distinct difference available, because it is very apparent that there are marked camps inside society, and politics will begin to reflect that again, and some of it will come out in the terms of real choice about an alternative. I can't promise that, of course. I can only try and lobby for it, and I do damned hard. But the point is, I think that is going to be a real change which we're going to see, and there is going to be an increasing process of change for reform of finance, for example. When I was involved in starting the Tax Justice Network, and there were a tiny number of us, I mean, we could have sat very easily on the front row here and still had a few seats to spare in 2002, nobody would have imagined that we would have seen a world where there was a global mass movement saying, what do we want? Tax justice. When do we want it? Now. And that's in 9 years. Now, 9 years doesn't meet Harry's requirement for a world formulation of a policy in 2 weeks, but it is a massive change. This perception that tax havens were harmful was not created overnight, but in only a few years, using the net intelligently, producing messaging and a lot of background research, quite a lot of which I'm responsible for, to prove the facts, we have changed the terms of debate. The G20 is discussing those very issues now because we put them on their agenda. They won't give us what we want, but the point is a small number of people who have worked out consensually what they want and reasoned it through with facts make an enormous impact upon the world. There may only be a few hundred tents in London, there may only be a few hundred tents in New York, and everywhere around the world might only be a few tens of thousands of tents. But between them, they represent a pivotal point where, you're quite right, we are coming to the end of a particular economic paradigm, I believe, and a new one has got to be created. We do need vision. We don't know what it's going to be, but the point is we're beginning to explore it. And that is what will change, because that discussion will be happening. Right now, it's closed down, including in the world's universities and economics departments, where only one issue. It's amazing, isn't it? Neoliberalism is all about competition, but you must not dissent. That's their terms of competition.
Jude. on the question of
what
success looks like.
People say, people, not people, some people in the media say, when they are not able to think for themselves or find a good source, that it is not clear at all what these people want. Well, it's very basic, extremely basic. What they want is equality, justice, equality before the law. These are freedom of speech, perhaps also is a strong component. That's a very basic thing. How do they get it? That's a more complex thing. But I think these basic notions of wanting to be part of the system that controls you is something that is not opaque, actually. And people don't want to talk about it because it's just so obvious. You know, in a way, that's what we all want. But there hasn't been space to discuss the fact that that is what we all want, and that we haven't been getting it to date, and how are some ways that we can get it. I agree that the opening up of the space of the debate is the most important. So these ideas that are coming to the fore are as a result, yes, of many different factors, but specifically now as a result of this Occupy movement. And the people in the tents are merely representative of a particular community desire. So down at Occupy London, there's got some 200 tents, maybe 1,000 people. And you might say, how can that possibly be the 99% of the country? Well, of course it's not the 99% of the country, but it represents some certain hopes and desires that the 99% has. The 99%'s not all down there, but they all want, or almost all want, those people to be there.
Yes,
those people to be there.
You seize the opportunity. If you don't want to seize the opportunity, then that's...
And I have to say that for that genuine and there is a genuine argument that, well, okay, we want them there because they're saying, if we look to the question that we had when you first opened, about half the people in the room thought they knew what the Occupy movement wanted, half didn't, but the majority supported them. What the hell's going on there? So I think that is half do not know in a declarative sense what they want. Principle 1, Principle 2, Principle 3, but there's a certain feeling about what is going on, and people believe in that feeling. And it's not something that is yet concretely expressed in declarative terms, but that doesn't mean it's not expressed in other ways. And that's why people in general support it. But if there's a view that the particular group that is there, and it is a particular group, and there are some problems with people who are working full-time jobs all the time, can't go in the day. I understand there's meetings at 7 p.m. and people can go in the weekends. That everyone should just go down there. I mean, that's the problem to solve capture of a movement by a particular group. Just flood it out with the rest of the population.
Time to bring the audience in again. Tell us who you are, sir. Thank you for waiting.
James Thacker. I worked with 7 human rights groups, including Index. We gave you the prize 5 years ago, was it?
2008.
Yes, I'm sorry to hear your ongoing problems. I represented Index at Vanunu's release in Israel. I agree with everybody here. I don't think we're addressing the seriousness of this problem. It's much more serious than you're getting to it. But I was sitting in front of Wolfgang Schäuble, who's the point man trying to save Europe at the moment. And he was worried. I don't think anybody understands what the problem is, but I think Lehman Brothers is getting there. And I go further and say that I think the problem is Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff, and if you think capitalism understands its own problems, Bernie Madoff was for quite a long time the head of NASDAQ. That means that the SEC and everybody in the financial community in New York was having this thing going on. He was doing his Ponzi scheme already in the mid-'70s. I think what's perceived with the bonuses and whatever is that, in fact, the whole capitalist system is on the verge of being a Ponzi scheme. It's accumulating vast amounts of capital. It's unaccountable. It works all over the world. It is, in fact, a post-colonial mechanism. But these bonuses, everybody's worried about this. I mean, of course, this thing in front of St. Paul's is speaking for everybody, because everybody, on an instinctive level, realizes that capitalism has actually reached a point where it is unaccountable even to its own people. And these bonuses, all this thing, I mean, there's a lot of mysterious money flowing around. People don't know where it's going. The money markets are immense with computers that can't be kept up with. And there are people who are controlling that and are taking lots of money and putting in property in Switzerland right now. And everybody sees this happening, and even the capitalists don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to defend the institutions. They don't know whether to get rid of the institutions. This is what Schäuble was arguing about. This is why the Greeks are right, as you say, to oppose. But nobody's got the answer. And I think the problem is much, much more serious. I mean, we're facing something really serious. And these people protesting, I wish they could find the words for it, because I think there's a real problem right in capitalism.
Thank you for that. Hold the thought, panel, because I want to bring in someone from down here, and then another chap over here. So,
Hi, Layla. I'm just a member of the public. Julian, what role do you think WikiLeaks has played in the Occupy movement?
Well,
answer that quickly, and then
there was an article about this in the Sydney Morning Herald recently, which speculated that there was a US Day of Rage started up by one of our people coming out of the Arab Spring. But so there's some sort of direct connections. For example, Naomi came from the Bradley Manning support movement. There's a lot of overlap with these anonymous people who are also our supporters. There is perhaps something that is interesting, which is said in relation to us in the Arab Spring, and is that courage is contagious, and that when we stood up to the Pentagon, and when the Pentagon made a formal 40-minute press conference saying that we should delete everything we had already published, everything we were going to publish, and cease dealing with US military whistleblowers, and we said go to hell, that inspired people in the Arab world to think that they could stand up to their dictators, because when they had stood up to their dictators previously, the United States had intervened in one way or another. And so this was a certain weakness, and that if we could stand up in response to that threat, then they could as well. I don't know. Perhaps there are more interesting connections. Perhaps when we release so much important information about global elites, global political elites and financial elites all at once, that was a shock and a destabilizing shock to the system. We predicted it would destabilize the Middle East. I don't know precisely whether it does, but there must be ripple effects. I can't tell how much of our work is important relative to the rise in general communications that has occurred.
Can we take a couple more points here? Who's got the mic? Yes, sir.
Hi. My name's Tom Nicholson. I'm working for the IB Times. I've been covering this story from beginning to end. And I found the national press have been unbelievably anti-protest, starting with the thermal images run by the Telegraph and the Times, but also the BBC and Sky completely missing the point and kind of almost focusing the protests on against the church somehow, and asking people, so you've got another scalp now, after the second resignation, isn't it time to go? It's like, well, no, because they're not even here for this. And my question is, why? Have the media missed the point in this, or are they anti-protest?
Okay, hold that thought. I think I'm the only sort of conventional media person on this platform. Yes, sir.
Dennis Marks, General Hack.
Nothing wrong with that.
Can I pose an answer to the question, what would it look like? It will not look like anything you expect it to look like. I'm sure there are other people in this room who, like me, were in Prague, Budapest, Moscow in 1989, where a revolution started and spread in each of those places without Facebook, without Twitter, without any of those things, but with the one characteristic that unifies all the things that are going on at the moment, which is a sense of disempowerment. That is what is actually informing all the various occupies that are happening. And therefore, it's a stupid question to ask, what do you want? Because the answer is, we want empowerment. Yep. We feel disempowered.
Can I just put these two questions really together to the panel? Because in a sense, the in inverted commas, failure of mainstream media has actually contributed, it could be argued, to that feeling of empowerment. And I just wonder, if we just go around the panel, your thoughts on how the mainstream media have reported and handled this Occupy.
I don't think they have missed the point. I think and I don't think there is an anti-protest sentiment. No one is denying the right to protest, and I would be down there if I believe they were. They're denying the right to go and camp in the street. That's what's I think pissed off. I think a lot of the kind of the media, they don't understand it. It's new. It is new to them. They're not disputing their right to be there. It's their right to camp there. It's right to stay there. And I think
We can leave London.
No.
I know.
It's with the fires and everything else. This is the other option.
Sorry?
This is the other option. We had the people setting fires in London. That's kind of option as well. The riots in London. That's another option. Because we let these guys so badly that they have no other impression how to impress themselves. They don't know that.
a fair point. I think the media coverage of the riots was slightly odd as well.
That's what breaking banks.
I don't.
That's the only thing which media covers, used to cover.
To stress the point, and also I think the media have realised what a lot of the general public think. You're targeting the wrong people, and it was an accident. They ended up outside the Church of England, but that is not. I mean, you could have moved. You could have moved the next day. You didn't have to stay there. And the fact that the media have hooked onto this is why this story is
I'm glad you're focusing on the important issues. It's really good to know that.
No, I'm just reflecting on the question, which was why is the media reporting it like this? It's because of an accidental, if it is accidental, cock up that's led you to not being occupying the London Stock Exchange, being outside St Paul's, and you've given the media a hook, which is the only establishment you've taken off is Three Vicars. Well done.
Okay, hang on. I mean, and what we're talking about is a. Oh.
No, I want you to carry on. I'm just sort of waving.
Okay, sorry. What we're talking about
pointlessly.
It's a particular rhetorical point in that that seems to be all over the mainstream media and is reported by people, and it's actually symptomatic of one of the problems we have specifically in the UK. Even the Corporation of London, when they're threatening legal action against us, will give lip service to. Oh, of course we respect the right to protest. What they actually mean is we respect the right to protest if it involves coming somewhere, unfurling your banners, waving about a bit, going home again. But the right to protest, that's not what the right to protest is. The right to protest is not the right to ineffectual protest. The right to protest is the right to protest when it could actually change something.
What would have improved, in your view, what would have improved mainstream media coverage?
Well, from where I am, which is actually looking after a lot of the mainstream media coverage, I've been extremely pleased. And I can tell you I've been extremely pleased. Some of the stories you've seen may have been negative, but we've been covered by everybody every day. To me, it's absolutely extraordinary. And some of the people on the media team are from a UK Uncut background, and they've been staggered by the amount of tension we've had. And that, to me, is actually, at root, actually a sign of incredible support for us in the mainstream media. And you'll notice that as things are going on, the rhetoric is changing. The BBC are no longer calling us anti-capitalist. That is quite a significant change. So in terms of our coverage by the mainstream media, there's stupid stuff like the Telegraph, thermal imaging, tense nonsense. But we turned that around because it was obviously nonsense. So I've been very pleased with the way things have gone.
Can I say
Daniel,
something like
media got it wrong?
I actually agree with some of that. I mean, I think that the mainstream media on the whole has been incredibly sympathetic to the protesters. And if you go to St Paul's, you can even see on the walls, they've got the support from the Telegraph and all different kinds of media coverage. I read the Financial Times closely every day. The Financial Times itself has run several op-ed pieces in favour of the protests. So what you have is a very small group of people, which is basically being endorsed by the establishment and being endorsed by the media. I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, going on demonstrations of about 3,000 people, so pretty small, but bigger than the number of people outside St Paul's, calling to get British troops out of Northern Ireland. Now that was a really, really unpopular cause, and it got hardly any media coverage. I think one small nib in one of the national papers, because that was something that was really unpopular with the establishment, and it really hated it. Whereas what you have now, it's not really accurate to say you have an Occupy movement. What you have is a few hundred people on Wall Street, a few hundred people outside St Paul's, a few hundred people in other places, being incredibly indulged by the elites and by the media because it reflects their own anxieties, it reflects their own angst. In that sense, it's a completely establishment movement.
Do you have a comment on that?
Hello. Yes. Hello.
Is that a comment on this?
Kind of.
Okay.
My name is Dominique. I'm actually based in South Africa. I live in a former Transkei. It's a truly isolated part of the world. I live in a mud hut with no water, no electricity. And I'm just asking myself if my neighbors were truly suffering from the crisis, if they were to put up tents and use the internet, would they have the same high profile as you have here?
Quick answer and then lightning hour.
Probably not. And we're not unaware of the fact we get disproportionate attention because we're in London. And it's not just people where you are who are being ignored. Elsewhere in the UK, there are a lot of occupations going on and they get no media coverage. This is something I think in London we need to work a lot harder on to actually give those people more of a voice and use our media channels to do that. But no, of course, you're completely right.
Yeah, I mean, so this very disingenuous to say, well, it's several hundred people in St. Paul's, because it isn't. I mean, on the 15th of October, you had a globally coordinated day of action which involved 951 cities across 80 countries, and that's historically unprecedented. And Paul Mason made a really great comment. He said, the last time when you had the end of globalization 1.0, the response is introverted. It's looking inwards. It's looking at export tariffs and things like this, the rise of fascism, etc. Instead, you had 951 cities essentially calling for a global movement against this. The comment you said about South Africa. Now, if you were to have a few tents where you were, and they said, we're part of this movement, actually, it would have got a lot of media traction. The Wall Street Journal would have said, all the way from, Wall Street to London, all the way to the Transvaal. It's a global movement. So that's the point. The reason why these people are being indulged by the media is... And that's a separate... Well, it depends. I mean, for instance, they were talking. So in this country, we've got 0.3% of people own 70% of the land. Yeah. The Duke of Westminster and the Duchy of Cornwall, the Prince of Wales. Actually, we live in one of the most feudal systems of land ownership in the world, right? So if it was about land redistribution in South Africa, which is a huge issue, and there was a movement here, as there is, say, in Brazil, for the redistribution of land, I think actually it would have a lot of pertinence. But that would be contingent upon what people's demands were. With regards to, I just want to make one really quick point about Egypt. So I've spoken to a lot of Egyptians, and it wasn't in Tahrir, it wasn't this sort of divorce from what's going on in Europe. If you actually look at the dynamics of what was going on in Egypt, they had a youth movement called Gefia in 2004. And this is exactly like what we see in Athens and what we see in Paris in 2005 with the banlieues. And it's the first time we have an urban youth movement which consciously reflects as disenfranchised and young. And it's not moving to Islamism, and it's not looking to the old kind of things of family and the mosque. So it's huge. And actually in Egypt, they say they're more like Greece than like Libya or Tunisia. So this kind of, again, it's that old trick, Egypt, these noble, courageous warriors in the third world, and we relatively wealthy people, we denizens in the global north, we don't know we've got it so good. Well, people in Burkina Faso could say the same thing for those in Cairo, They're literate, they can eat every day, what do they think they're doing? But fundamentally the problems are the same. High food inflation, high energy inflation, the inability to access housing. In 2008, who won the World Bank's award for best reform in the developing world in terms of implementing reform? Who won it? Egypt. It was a revolution against neoliberalism. It was a revolution against redistribution of land within the neoliberal city. One huge element that's been missed out within the analysis of the occupations movement. David Harvey, brilliant on this. He talks about capital accumulation within the urban city and property development. This is a revolt primarily against the neoliberal city. It's a revolt primarily against people having to move to Zone 4, Zone 5, whilst capital and only the transnational capitalist class live in Zone 1. It's police officers as much as it is the 99... it is police officers as much as those that live there, or cleaners and whatnot. So it's a revolt fundamentally against the neoliberal city. But Egypt, that's just a real misnomer that's...
We've got a point down here, I think.
Sorry, my name's Laurie. I'm a blogger and a journalist and stuff. I wanted to come back to what Harry and I think Christian from the back of the room said about protest, because I think it's quite interesting, this reaction on the right to what is and isn't a proper protest. On the one hand, you have Harry, like a lot of people across the world actually get this same attitude in New York. People saying, well, you've had your little protest, you made your point, now go away.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you have people like Christian saying it's not a proper protest unless you set yourselves on fire.
That's not quite what he said. That's not what he said. It's a gross misrepresentation of what he said.
Sorry. I think it's really interesting to analyse where the tension comes in, because when people suddenly start to turn around and realise something bigger is happening, is when it moves from a movement which is about protest to a movement which is about dissent. Because protest really, we've had lots and lots of protests in this country over the past decade. I think my first big political experience was the 2003, 2 million marching through London changed nothing. And that was protest. Protest is standing up and saying, not in my name, I don't want to be associated with this. And that actually, that supports the system in many ways. It's tacit approval for what a government might be doing by saying, I stand back, I opt out. Dissent is putting your body on the line or your future on the line and saying, I will not allow this to happen. I want something different. And that's what the people in London, in their own way, in Edinburgh in their own way, because Naomi is completely right, you know, it has been very London-centric, and that is a massive problem. That's what people are doing, and I think it's not been respected enough, the risk that these people are taking. It's a big deal getting a criminal record, which a lot of young people have. You know, I know many people who are facing, you know, jail sentences, people who have faced police violence. That is a significant thing. It's not. It shouldn't be belittled just because people protesting in Tahrir Square face maybe more danger, because that's like saying to a starving child in inner London, oh, you can't complain because there are people who are more starving in Ethiopia. It's that same kind of analysis.
Thanks. I'm going to come to you. Oh my God! Go on then. Go and talk about that.
Two things. The media. I think the media have overall, whilst being thoroughly irritating on the BBC, referring to it as anti-capitalist throughout, actually has given an extraordinary amount of courage and sometimes quite useful. A particular anecdote. My father saw me on BBC One News and said, "I now know what you do." It said protester under my name. It's taken him a long time to work out what I did.
People love labels, you see.
Yeah, they love labels. My father did. But actually I want to come down to something much more serious and to explain why I think it's got so much media coverage. Because it's absolutely in the right place. It's in the City of London. And that is where this problem is centred. Because what we're talking about is a movement which is absolutely open and transparent. People are shockingly talking about what they think, and they're discussing it, and they're voting on it, and they're being seen to dissent about it, and their decision making is there in front of people's faces. And the one thing that doesn't happen in this world, which is why you're utterly wrong in your analysis, because this is so radical and so not conservative, this is a thing that doesn't happen in the City of London. The whole of the City of London is designed on the basis of providing secrecy. Read Nick Shaxson's book Treasure Islands, look at what Maurice Glassman has done, read my work as a more theoretical background to what Nick Shaxson wrote, Finding the Secrecy World for the Tax Justice Network and other stuff. Tax havens exist to absolutely and emphatically provide secrecy, an imperfection, of course, in every market theory. It's wonderful that right-wing economists defend tax havens when their whole purpose is to provide market imperfection. I think that's an extraordinary thing. But what happens as well is you add a tax haven to a multinational corporation and you end up with complete and utter opacity. You have no chance whatsoever of finding out what a multinational corporation does in a tax haven at all, or indeed within its own accounts. You know, GE Capital is the biggest company I've found in the world so far. It has 8,000 subsidiary companies, and we do not know about 1 cent of trading from one of those companies to another one of those companies and the decision processes involved. BP, the biggest I found in the UK, 1,700 companies. We have no idea why they trade with each other in the way they do. All we know is it's designed to make damn sure that tax isn't paid and power is removed. And the focus of that entire structure is the City of London. And the traditional point of descent in the City of London was the west end of St Paul's Cathedral. This whole camp could not be located in somewhere more historically appropriate at this moment to challenge the absolute power structure which the conservative hierarchy loves, which the media can't understand this alternative way of thinking about, and which is going to be challenged to its core by this. This process is about accountability, transparency, paying your way, doing your due, being honest, open and accountable. And that is the last thing that the world's financial system is at the moment. And that's why it's there, that's why it's got to stay there, and that's why it will be there for a long time until change happens. And I believe it will.
Can I bring in another contributor?
Sorry, just a small comment, and this may be quite simplistic, but I wonder whether if we can come back to the demands and what do they, or rather, what do we want? Is it because we're trying to re-establish the rule of law? What we found is with everyone is equal under the law, and what we find is that with media coverage of places in Africa and so on and so forth, we've realized that actually our governments in our name have been undermining that and suppressing or causing poverty in other countries. And now what we're doing is we're actually having a form of introspection And we're looking within our society and saying, well, actually, the rule of law, as we pride ourselves on in our nations, does not apply to us either. And is that too simplistic, maybe?
I doubt you very much.
Thank you.
But we'll pick it up in a second. Can we just go behind and then, if you just pass that to...
Yeah, my question is a bit the same. It's like, what is, there's basically discontent about what's happening, and there's a lot of people all around the world campaigning against it. But we have seen so many campaigns against things. It's like, what is the next step? And is it changing the governments? Is it changing the law? And do you have structures or leaders, to create that? Or is it going to, my fear is it going to be, end up in being one of these fantastic starting points that end up in not changing anything, So, I'm really supportive of this, because basically I'm kind of part of the...
We'll try to answer both those questions.
Oh, yeah, mine was a little slightly different. It was several people have said the solution to this is totally uncharted territory. We don't know where we're going, where we need to go. There's one progressive economist in the U.S. who I think would disagree with that, Elizabeth Warren, who feels that we know what the solution is. It's the social contract that Franklin Roosevelt created and that has been over the last 30 years dismantled. She points out there was a bank run, there was a bank collapse in the U.S. every 10 to 12 years like clockwork till 29. Glass-Steagall gets passed. There is no banking run. There is no collapse until 1980. Reagan comes in, boom. 87, you get the S&L crisis. Then 99, Glass-Steagall gets repealed. And if Glass-Steagall were still the law of the U.S. land, 2008 would not have happened. So her point is, we know what the right answer is. It sure as hell isn't socialism. I lived in the Soviet Union. God knows I don't want to go back to that. It's what FDR created. There is actually a model there that we know works, and we stupidly dismantled it.
Okay, thanks. Can you pass the microphone back there? I just want to address this. It's an interesting question, Julian, which is, if we can't sort of say what success looks like, I think the question about what the next step is and how you move from where we are now, what is the next step? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, perhaps I'll merge this into this question about the rule of law. In my work with Guantanamo Bay and other CIA black sites and tax havens, I found something similar, which was a coordinated, systematized attempt to evade the accepted rule of law in one nation by laundering out money, in the case of tax havens, to small offshore jurisdictions that could be easily manipulated, and people, in the case of Guantanamo Bay and the renditions program. So there's a systemized movement by the elite in various countries to evade the rule of law, and in essence to create a new law for people who are close to power compared to the rest of the population. And that's a serious problem. For the next step, there are actually some concrete proposals coming out of the US. So one of those concrete proposals is that every congressional district will elect 2 representatives for the Occupy movement, who will then go to Pennsylvania and have, if you like, a sort of constitutional convention, which is a tradition for the US in Pennsylvania. And they will present a list of grievances that have come forth, that have been nominated, and those lists of grievances, which can include solutions, will be voted on. And I think that is actually the next step forward. It is to get a democratic mandate.
Okay.
It is to gain the perception of democratic legitimacy, which then gives a method for pushing something forward.
Okay, that's a very, very clear next step. I'm going to ask you all about this, because I think it's a really good question. The ultimate solution, well, we might not get it, but the next step is quite an interesting question. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, just with regards to, because you said this, I remember on my first day of Occupy LSX, where I've got a hole in my mouth. You said it's not about the destruction of law, but the construction of law. Now, what I find fascinating with this is that if you look at the 15M movement in Spain, it was primarily a revolt against representative democracy. So this idea that we're now going to return to a 1931 style settlement with Roosevelt, I find really unlikely for several reasons. So if you look at, for instance, if you look at the role of UK and Cut, for instance, with regards to tax justice, we now know we live in a globalized political economy where we have the free movement of persons, goods, capital. We know that. And it now looks like the nation state is no longer capable of being able to get sufficient tax capture to pay for the welfare state as we've known it since 1945. That seems to be the case. So how do we do that? There's two options. We'll either have a globalised tax regime, so we harmonise things like corporation tax, income tax. It could be on a regional level, like with the European Union, or it could be a globalised initiative, say something like the G71. We might have harmonised corporation tax, or we might eventually just have the kind of compromise where we eradicate the welfare state as we know it. Probably going to one of two ways in the next couple of decades, we know that. So the idea that we're going to have the reformation of the Roosevelt ideal of 1931 along the lines of national representative democracy I find really problematic, because the nation state is no longer the main game in town. We've seen the end of it in terms of ontological primacy, and also with the internet we now have ways of coordinating social provision for one another which no longer needs representatives. The whole point, we live in a society of information abundance. Representative democracy is premised upon information scarcity. So just like the way of the retail store, just like the way of an abundance of things, perhaps the House of Commons might sort of be a thing of the past come the next 20, 30 years.
I want to bring the rest of you in, but we just have a point here, I think. Yeah.
Frank Jackson, lifelong member of the Labour Party, still an activist after 60-odd years, but nevertheless, never having had any illusions about the Labour Party, a means for actually creating the sort of world that I would like to see, but nevertheless, a medium in which I can have a tiny little bit of influence and hopefully go on doing so. Of course, you might take it for granted that, having said that, I was totally opposed to the adoption of the neoliberal ideas under New Labour and so on. It is slowly backtracking from that at the present time, and I'm trying to do my bit again to speed up that backtracking. But first comment I want to make. The Soviet Union was never remotely like my concept of socialism or the concept of socialism of any of the pioneers.
No, but that's just what it turns into.
That's not an inevitability.
Sorry, there were very, very... I could have a long debate about that, about the history
well,
of the
let's not do that.
but it's not relevant tonight.
Next week.
Oh, human nature, come off it. Human nature is far very complex.
So we're going down a side.
Sure, I agree. I want to get back
to your main point.
Crucial point, yeah. I've got here the initial statement by the Occupy LSX group, and the current system is unsustainable. Now, I think that is an absolutely unarguable statement. And starting from that, of course, what we do about it is enormously complex, and I don't claim to have any immediate answer, and I'm not surprised that the people on the in front of St. Paul's don't have an answer to it. But if we start from a recognition of that, we have got some hope of getting somewhere. Capitalism is predicated on continual expansion, continual growth, and on a finite planet, we cannot go on doing that. Final point, we're talking all the time about money, but money has no value in itself. Real wealth consists of goods and services which contribute to the well-being of people, and that the basic inputs for that are raw materials, energy, human labour and skill. And money is only the means of controlling the distribution of that, and the problem is that the distribution of that at the present time is, of course, totally wrong. And this is where we come back to the 1% and the 99%.
Thank you. I think that's a very good exposition of the problem as you see it. I'm still interested in this question of, what to you, Harry, would be a convincing next step?
Making it through winter, I'd say, would be a perfect step. No, I'm not being deliberately provocative there, but genuinely. Still being there in the new year would be it. Still getting the same level of coverage would be a success. In my view, if I was advising the movement, which I'm not, but if I was going to, I'd say it's too narrow at the moment. You need to start broadening out. It's the Bank of England that's creating inflation, pushing prices up. It's the politicians that bailed out the banks. If you really want to start winning people over and having a broader pool, you've got to move down the road. You are targeting and trying to shut down the stock exchange. you're targeting the one.
You're
targeting the one bit of the city that can drag us out of this mess. You've got to branch out. You've got to attack the politicians. The Labour Party aren't going to do anything. Ed Miliband said he wanted to go down there and maybe he should show his solidarity with the movement. And his advisors, hit the roof. It's not going to happen. If you want your voice to be heard and continue to be heard in the same level and in the same kind of unprecedented levels of media coverage, in my view, that you've got so far, you've got to branch out and it's got to move down the road to Westminster.
But
then enjoy the platform.
Let me respond to that, and then I want to bring some more.
You have the platform.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough in the initial thing I said that we're talking about, yes, finance and sort of the moral constraints on finance or the lack of them, but also the relationship between finance and government. I did actually say that. So yeah, I mean, how our politics operates and whether people are really accountable, people feel truly enfranchised, yes, is a very big part of what we're talking about. In terms of next steps, did you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, we couldn't quite get the sort of the terminal vision, but what about the next step?
No, I mean, I can't tell you exactly where it's going either, because one of the things I've noticed, there was a magic moment on October the 15th where I had to get back into the kettle because I'd been out and had to get back. And when I was there before, there was some idea there were a few people there who knew a little bit more about what was going on than everybody else. When I came back, the thing was organising itself, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. What we're doing at Occupy is people are organising themselves in an autonomous way without the need for hierarchy. And they're working incredibly efficiently. We've got a hell of a lot done in 2 weeks, and we're starting to direct our attentions to policy. We've just set up our first policy working group. So the ease with which this happens and the way people are learning about how to organise themselves is, to me, that in as much as I can talk about where it's going to go, it's that, because I think there's something very natural and something very spontaneous that's quite powerful. And I think actually that new kind of social organisation is the best guide of where it's going to go.
And sort of leading towards Julian's sort of Pennsylvania idea. I mean, is that too grand, do you think?
I don't know. I wouldn't argue with Julian.
We've got someone at the back there.
Yeah,
sorry, I know you want to come in, but
I'm actually quite, my name is Kletia Zeko. I'm an LSE graduate. I'm very excited about the movement and really looking forward to see more of it coming. My only problem is that I still think it's still too vague. Yeah, the world has a lot of problems and injustices in the world, but just without focusing more, you're not going to be able to change much. The gentleman there recalled the communists and the dissidents there and the 1998 revolutions. But after these revolutions, because people just wanted freedom and justice, these were their requests, what they ended up with were like extreme capitalism, where the same people stayed in power and still manipulated the situation and didn't really change much in terms of justice.
Okay, so more focus. Harry wants a broader movement.
Why is there not coming more from it? Is there something impeding it?
Okay, Richard.
I think we are massively underselling what's coming out of it. I was there on Monday night, and I just slipped in. I was really looking like a chartered accountant in a very conventional suit on Monday night. And it was quite fun to be there because I was by no means alone in a very conventional suit, actually, which was great. But I went into the back of Tent City University where I'd spoken a few days earlier. And what was fascinating was a really intense discussion of land value taxation. Now, I happen to be excited by taxation. I was born with that fascination with tax. I can't help it. I'm going to die with that fascination. But these people were having a really, really serious discussion. It wasn't some airy thing, we want to change the world. No, it's, could this be a practical delivery mechanism? And what we are going to see is much more of that. What this movement is going to do is disseminate that idea that there is a cohesive group of ideas which together can become a platform for change. So there will be people discussing a problem in Kurdistan, and why not? And they will find common ground with people who are looking at tax reform and people who are looking at resource depletion and so on, because these are all facets of a problem, and that is what it's going to devolve into. But I also find it very encouraging that I can go to Norwich and find there's an Occupy Norwich movement. We haven't got an Occupy Downham Market movement yet, I admit, and maybe we need one. But, we are finding this movement moving out. And the discussion, the debate, and also the search for those alternatives is feeding an appetite which I believe will be a tangible outcome of this. It may not all happen on the outside of St Paul's, because it may happen very near where you're living as well. But the fact is that debate will grow. That's the outcome.
Okay, we've got a couple more minutes. Julian, you wanted to come in on that, and then I know
So this question about in the Soviet Union, where after collapse it was replaced by neoliberalist influenced Russian speakers who had been educated in the United States. Well, yes, that is a problem. But if we look at what is happening in Egypt now, we can actually see that exact same problem being borne out. That as part of the demands by the Egyptian protesters, number one, the removal of Mubarak regime, number two, justice, and so on. There was not enough a formulation of how to reconfigure the power structures within the Egyptian state, and as a result, people there are now suffering the consequences. But the show's not all over; it's going on, but there's big problems. So it is one of the strengths, actually, of the Occupy movement that it is not saying we just want to tear everything down. This is a movement not about the destruction of law, but about the construction of new law, and working out what that structure is takes time, and it takes harmonization of different groups with different views, and it is literally, I believe, an evolutionary process. I don't mean evolutionary process in the journalist sense. I mean evolutionary process in the biological sense, where particular groups having particular views rise up and become successful within that broader movement and spread those, cross-pollinate those views to others. And the ones that appeal the most and garnish the most support within that movement and within the broader society will come to the fore. And that is good, that at the moment there is actually not very concrete, there's a range of proposals, but there is not one central proposal. Because if there's one central proposal, A, it will probably be wrong, and B, it's not going to harmonise with all the interests of society to create a proposal that will actually succeed.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to take a couple more. You've got a...
I wanted to...
do you want to use the microphone?
My name's Gabriel Balfe. I've been at Occupy LSX on and off for a fair few times. I was also in the student movement a large part last year. Wanted to respond to Harry's point about targeting politicians, about all that. And I can assure you there is a large awareness there of the ineptitudes of the politicians of the day. What there is a sense that the bankers and the politicians are intertwined. So if you look at America, where in 2008 there's this great upsurge of hope for Barack Obama, and a huge part of the left and the middle ground go into there thinking brilliant change. Complete disillusionment there, and a large part of that base is what made up Occupy Wall Street, which of course was what inspired Occupy LSX originally, if not, it wasn't the original kind of occupation. Numerous people have been targeting politicians, haven't they? A friend of mine was arrested 2 nights ago for participating in an unauthorised demonstration in Parliament Square. I've known people who have got beaten, who've gone hospitalised for while protesting outside Parliament Square. There is now an awareness, though, that while these guys are completely inept and are part of the problem, the financial sector is also a huge part of the political makeup of our circumstances, and they both need to be addressed here.
Okay. One more, and then I'm going to ask the panel to wrap. So.
Yeah, my name's Artin. I'm also at the protest. I just it's a piece of advice more than a question. I mean, one person saying it's too narrow, another person saying it's too broad. My piece of advice is literally just come down to St Paul's. It's 20 minutes away, and see for yourself. Talk to the people, share your own opinions, watch the meetings, see how it's done, see how it's organised. And I promise you, my personal guarantee is that you will be surprised, because it's not what it says in the media. It's different, and you will be surprised. For example, tomorrow we've got a live broadcast from Syria, first of its kind ever in Europe, being streamed live at the cathedral in St Paul's, not in St Paul's, in the square. Just come down and see. That's my piece of advice, because you're all very confused, and that's fine because the media isn't the most true thing. Well, apart from Naomi and maybe Julian. But just come down and see for yourself. It's 20 minutes away. There's free tea and coffee. You're more than welcome to come down and just see for yourself.
That's great.
And we need more washers up.
Daniel, you'll find your...
This is a serious point because of
the market's failing.
Dysentery could close that camp, and we need a lot of help in the kitchen to keep that clean.
Okay. Daniel.
Well, I forget who it was who asked the question about what would constitute success, but it was a very astute question. Because when you have a movement that doesn't really have any clear goals, it's very hard to have any kind of distinct measure of success. And in fact, what seems to happen, and I think the panel today and a lot of the audience bears it out, is that the movement itself becomes the kind of goal. So there's a complete obsession with the movement and what it does and what it's about, to an incredibly self-indulgent extent. Not as self-indulgent as Julian Assange apparently claiming the responsibility for the Arab Spring, which is absolutely phenomenal that anyone should dare claim such a thing.
Julian Assange does not.
A genuine political movement. The reason that what's happening outside St. Paul's is not a political movement, I mean this in a proper technical sense, is that a political movement is about articulating interests and pursuing interests. So, for example, socialist movements claim they supported working class interests, conservative movements will claim they supported national interests, and so on. Whatever kind of movement it was about interests. What's happening in Occupy Wall Street and London is that they're avoiding any clear kind of politics, any clear kind of clash of interests.
Absolutely amazing.
Because it is such a phenomenally conservative movement. And in fact, if you want clarity, if you want to get rid of the kind of messiness of life, what you have to have is political struggles and political arguments and political debates. That's how you get clarity.
Like this debate here.
Just to conclude, if you want to support something really, really positive, support the right of the Greek people to determine their own future, to have a referendum and decide what they want to, what should happen in Greece. That's something genuinely positive.
Thank you. Aaron, you've been waving frantically over there.
I just want to make a quick emendation to that. So a social movement within the literature is characterised as a shared identity, a shared enemy, and shared tactics. The Occupy movement has all three. It has a shared identity, it has a shared framework of tactics, and it has a shared identity. Although they're all embryonic, of course. I just wanted to say two brief things about the role of politicians.
That's a presentation. That's why.
The role of politicians and what next? Politicians. Nick Clegg was in Tottenham a few days after riots, and he said, "I'm going to give these people optimism and hope," because that's what politicians deal with: it's affect, it's emotional disposition. They can't actually interfere with the social relations of production anymore. They haven't been able to since the mid-70s, because that's how neoliberalism works. If the spreads go on Italian debt more than 6%, it doesn't matter if it's the left, the centre, or the right. They have to impose austerity measures, because otherwise they can't shift their debt. Finance markets won't buy it. It's as simple as that. So with that kind of stranglehold of international markets buying sovereign debt, you have essentially a one-party state in places like Greece and Italy, and increasingly I think we'll see here. With regards to what next, it's about addressing people's material concerns. I think overwhelmingly in this country, that's about space, i.e. housing, and it's about debt. These are the two massive twin problems of neoliberalism. Also about the decommodification of everyday life. Another third one, about giving people meaning to their lives. So I would say what's of utter importance is a housing movement, a movement for the redistribution of land, and also about the revivifying of democracy. So I would support a referendum on EU membership, and I would demand also a referendum on the banking bailout, whether the taxpayer should get it back and let those banks go to the wall.
Harry.
Yes.
Final thought. 30 seconds.
It's all very. I would like to say that this room isn't representative of the public. Mainly, I think that as this goes on and on and on, is people are going to wondering how the people there are sustaining themselves, how they manage to not have to go to work every day, how they can not have to, have the luxury, and it's a dubious luxury, but the luxury of not working is sitting outside St. Paul's all day. That's, I think, where the chink in the arm, that's the weakness today. And that's what people are wondering.
I've met electricians and brickies down there.
I have as well,
I've done interviews with them.
The hardcore group of people, how are they supporting themselves?
That's your final thought. Final thought.
My final thought. It's very interesting hearing the plurality of views here. I would disagree with the fact that what we're doing is not political. What we're doing is taking quite a diverse selection of views. Yeah, it's not quite as diverse as society as a whole, but there are people there with profound disagreements. We work together, we find consensus, and we're working out how to organise ourselves. That is the very stuff of politics, surely.
Great. Richard, final thought.
In September 2009, I was asked to speak at the World Bank, and the managing director of the bank spoke after me and said, when we have a mass movement that is demanding the end of banking secrecy, the end of tax havens and all things that go with that, when there are people outside banks in the cities demanding change to the financial system, then we will really worry. I think that's happening, and they're beginning to get really worried.
30 seconds, Julian, your final thought.
The technology gives and technology takes away. In the last 20 years, technology has meant that banks and companies can transact with each other faster than ever before. They can convey the instruments of wealth and do so in secrecy and do so at lightning speed. There is now only 220 milliseconds between New York and Nairobi for a banking transaction. That means that money controlled by corporations that have the ability to enjoy those transactions, this is a lot more than 30 seconds.
It is, I was going to point that out.
Enjoy those transactions, are able to move stolen wealth faster than political sanction. And political sanction moves a lot slower, and political sanction is a derivative of moral sanction. As a result of the communications revolution, we are able to move moral sanction faster than we could before and coordinate it more than we could before. And our real task is to breach both the speed and complexity and secrecy of those financial institutions that hide their immoral conduct using those three methods.
Thank you very much. Feel free to give the panel a round of applause, and yourselves, actually. And that, I think, concludes proceedings. Thank you very much.